Welcome csc200 to ex12b. We're going to call this 12b because it's a little extra addendum to our exercise 12 where we're going to do our form validation. That's the last one that we used our SpongeBob database, and we were adding things to our SpongeBob database. So we're just going to add on to that. So once you log into your container, you're going to still use ex12. And before you even get started here with any of the files, I'm going to get everything rolling here, including my MySQL, even my pt1, because we just want to go over a couple things before we do this. The code itself won't take that long, and we're going to be using JavaScript, so I'm sure you're excited to do another programming language, but it'll help us just kind of validate our form and make sure we don't send nothing through a form to our database. So I'm going to open up this first, and we'll just get started. And I'll open up my terminal down at the bottom. I just had it collapsed, and we'll get everything started. So I'll get all three of these going here, and then we'll open up our windows that we need to open up. And then finally, I'll run my SQL, and I'll get that running. And I don't need this then, so I should be able to close this up as long as this is running. And I'm even going to minimize this. And remember, we have to go to Project and run our URL and port just to get things going. So we'll have a bunch of windows open here. And the first one I'll open up, I'll go right inside here, and I'll just make sure that inside Gorm PHP we open up ex12, and that should be our form. That should show us our form, and I'm just going to leave that like that. And then I'm going to go back here and just open it again, and I'll put that over there. This is going to be the pt1. Now remember, when we do this one, we don't go into Gorm PHP. We just click on the end here, put our cursor at the end, and do a /, and then just do pt1. And then just log in with root. And the last thing I had in here was my SpongeBob database, and I could go into characters just to check it out and see what I had, and I'll ignore this. And I had 12 characters in here. We made 8, and then we added some in exercise 12 through our form, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And one thing I just want to show here, and I'm not sure what's going to happen. The last time I did this, I had all fields that you had to fill in. But on this one, I used a radio button. So that may affect things a little bit. So we'll just kind of see what happens here. So I'm going to go back here and just to see what happens. This is our original form. Now I don't have to refresh it because it just opened up. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit submit. And there's our database, and nothing came in here. And it did not actually enter a blank one. When I did this in the past, if you didn't enter anything, it would enter blank. And I think part of the reason it's not doing that is because of gender, because we actually have a radio button. So it's not doing anything, and it's not adding any blank data. So that's actually a good thing, but we also want to make sure that people put things in a database. So I'm still going to validate this to make sure that someone actually puts this in. And let's just check this. Let's make sure nothing new came in here. And I think I did this last time, but I'll just refresh it. I'll just hit refresh here just to make sure there isn't a blank one. And there isn't a blank one here. Part of what we're going to do is we're going to use some JavaScript. Now, if you go to JavaScript, W3 Schools, that's always my go-to to just find out the code. You can scroll down to the JS HTML DOM. The DOM means Document Object Model. If you go to DOM Elements, that means it'll show way to capture elements, HTML elements of the document object, which means all the element in your HTML or PHP page. And there's different ways to do this, and people have different reasons for doing them. I always use ID. In the csc100 class, I use ID because it's most compatible with older browsers and things like that. So I'm going to stick with this for now. I'm going to use finding HTML elements by ID. They all have IDs, so it's easy to find that. But there's other ways to do that, just so you're aware. And what I'm going to do first is just go down and find the one where it says finding HTML element by ID. And there's nothing else you have to do here except just copy this. I'm going to copy this, and you could certainly type it as well. And I'll copy that, and I'll go back and I'll open up. I actually want my index page because that's where the form is, because this is going to be part of validating the form. And if you remember, this is where the JavaScript is. So our form ends here, JavaScript starts here, but these are HTML comments. These things here are comments. Just because they say JavaScript, it doesn't mean there's going to be JavaScript in there. I have to make sure I put stuff in here. So I'm going to click here and hit return, and I can't just type JavaScript in here. I have to put script tags. So I'm going to put a script tag, and I'll just use generic script tags, just like that. And then in between here, this is where I'm going to put all my JavaScript. Because remember, we're in an HTML page. So in order to do JavaScript in an HTML page, we have to indicate that it's inside a script tag. Just like we have to put PHP inside of PHP tags, and we have to put CSS inside of style tags. So we're putting our JavaScript inside of script tags, and I'm just going to paste what I just copied. And it says var my element equals document.getElementById intro. Now what these things are, this is a variable. My element is a variable, and that could be any name that you choose. Now we're going to be using these things. So we're going to use first, last, species, and gender. Those are going to be the elements that we're going to be checking on, because those are the only ones that we're filling in our form. So you can use a variable name that's the same as the names you're using up here. We've used them for a number of different things. The IDs, the names, you could still use a variable name. So I'm going to call my first one first. And you don't have to put quotes on here in JavaScript. And you do have to put var. If you're working in Python with a variable, you don't have to put var, but here you do. And we're basically assigning a variable first is going to represent, and this is the whole address, the document get element by ID, and the ID that we're looking for first is going to be this one, first. And you can see the way this is going to work. There's going to be first, last, species, and then we're going to figure out these. This is a little different than I've done in the past because we actually are using names here. So we may have to change that. I'll probably just even stop the video and just try it out and make sure it works before I do a bunch of ways that work out wrong. But these, the first three at least, will make sure that we have these IDs here. So the first one I'll use first. So this is the ID. And one other thing we have to put here is going to be value, .value, because it's going to be the value we get back. Just like these have values of M, F, and O, as long as they have values, that's what's going to get registered into the database. Now here, the value is going to be whatever someone puts in the database. So down here, we have to validate that there's going to be a value. We don't have to just validate that it exists. We have to validate that someone put something in there. So that's why we're going to have to put that .value after that. And let me show you something else before we keep going here. Now this was just the start of DOM elements. There's also something up here called JS forms. And if you go to JS forms, they do this. They do this JavaScript form validation. And if you look at what they have here, even though they're doing it a little bit differently, they're using a different method of getting the DOM element. But anyway, they still have to use .value here to get that. So we're actually going to use this, and we're actually going to copy this. So I'll keep this open, but just note that we have to get the value of it here. And once you do this, this is pretty easy. So this won't be hard. These are just variables, JavaScript variables. And notice that they all end in semicolons as well, just like the PHP did. So I'm just going to copy this. And I'm just going to do 3 of these right now because I'm not sure what's going to happen with the gender. But I'm going to do these. I'm going to put last, and then this one is going to be species because we're filling that in. These are values that we're filling in. That's why I'm doing these first, because the one with the radio button is going to be a little bit different. And I'm just going to double check because these names have to be the ID names exactly as they are, first, last, species. So that's what we're doing first. And if we're probably going to put another variable in for the genders, but I want to double check how to do that. Make sure this works first. Then what I'm going to do is then I'm going to go back here, and I'm actually going to copy this whole function. There's a JavaScript function here, and they have a try it yourself thing, and it just goes through, and if you hit submit here, this is called an alert. It's a little like window that pops up, and it's alert. You might see those sometimes, or you may see things that show up on a page. If you forgot an email or forgot a password or didn't do a password the right way or anything like that, you may get something like this. This was kind of more old school JavaScript, would always have alerts. People don't like alerts as much anymore, but we could start off with an alert, and then we could even write it to the page if we want. But that's an alert. So if I don't fill anything in here, I get an alert, and it won't let me do anything. It won't run the function that we have down here. It won't validate the form, or it won't submit the form, I should say, unless we actually put something in. So I'm just going to put in my name here, and then if I hit submit, it now received the information to submit the form. So that's what that does. That's what our validation code, our validation function is going to do in JavaScript. It's just going to validate that we put something in there. So you can copy it right from here. I'm going to copy this whole thing. And remember, we already have script tags, so that's what we were doing in our file. And I'm going to copy this whole function thing, just like that. And notice it ends in 2 curly braces because there's 2 curly braces up here. There's one for the whole function, and there's also one for an if statement. There's an if statement in there. And I'm going to copy all that, the whole function, up to the script tag. And I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to put that after my variables. And then I'm just going to tab this stuff in. Whitespace isn't important with JavaScript as it is like with Python, like where indents are a big deal. So I'm just going to tab this stuff in just so it looks good and organized. What really matters with JavaScript is the curly braces, where they end up. And I'll just move these things over so they look nice as well. I'll just leave see, this is the opening and closing curly brace for the entire function. And then this is an open and closing curly brace for the if statement. And I think we had if statements before. I think we used those before with the PHP possibly. So that if something is something, name must be filled out. We could even do it for the first one. Now we're going to have a whole bunch here. We're going to do it for 3 right here. And we could even say first name must be filled out. Now we'll use an alert to start. And this says if x. Now we don't have a variable name x. We have a variable name first. And by the way, I forgot to fill this out. So this should be last. And this one should be species. So I should have my 3 variable names. I even use the same variable names as the ID names, which is fine. So instead of using X here, I'm going to use first because this is the first one. And this thing, it says double quotes, means it's an empty string. There's nothing there. Remember, this is a space, this is an empty string. And for conditional statements like we're using, where we're weighing if this is equal to that, we use double equals. We use an equal sign when we're using variables, but we use double equals when we're testing equality. If we're going to say if the first name is equal to nothing, then use this alert, then output this alert. And that's what we're going to do first. And we could even see if this works, but remember, we have this whole line here that we don't need. So I'm going to get rid of that because we're not using var x. But we can actually copy these. We can put these right in our function if we want. They could be outside, but there's no reason not to put them inside either. So we're going to put them in here. And I'll tab them over so that we have a nice clean function with our variables used in there because that's the only place we're going to use them. So we're going to keep them in our function. So we're declaring variables inside our function, which is fine. They're getting the value from each ID of these 3. And then this first thing here, it's saying if first equals the quote, then something's going to happen. This is the first part we're going to do here. It says if first is equal to nothing, first name must be filled out, and it'll do an alert. That's what this little alert function is. And it says return false. So that means if you return false, it's not actually going to submit the form. What I'm going to do also is after this one, I'll leave this on a blank line, and I'll just put else. And I'm not going to put any condition here. I'm just going to put else, but I still have to put 2 curly braces. So there's 2 curly braces for else. There's still 2 for if. And then there's 2 for the beginning of the function and the end of the function. Now we could call the function validate form. That's fine. We could do that. And what I'm going to put here for else, I'm going to put return true. That means if this isn't the case, that means you filled everything out. It's going to return true, and we're going to use that to run the form. And where we're going to do that, we're going to go up here. And if you want to look at this, we could check this out. We could look at one of the forms. And you can see in here, I'll do the try it yourself again. I closed that up. But in here, they have, for the form, they have on submit equals. Now this is for the JavaScript because we already had an action, but this says on submit, and then it says return validated form. Let me stretch this out. And it actually has it in quotes. So it's in there like a string because it's kind of an attribute of HTML because we're in a form, so it's an attribute, but the on submit is putting an attribute in quotes, and it's saying return because you need that return statement to actually tell it to run this function or not. It needs to be either told it's going to be true or false. If it's false, it's not going to do it. If it's true, it's actually just going to submit the form. A false statement down here will keep it from submitting the form. Once it's true, it'll go through and it'll submit the form. So we're going to do something like this, and you could even copy this, or you could type it in, whatever you want to do, but it's going to be on submit, and it's going to have that inside there. And we're using that same name, so that's fine. So this is all inside the form, the opening form tag. So I'm going to put on submit equals return a space and then validate form. And I'll stretch this just so you can see the whole, what it looks like. And there are quotes around there, and validate form has the parentheses, just like we do in the function definition. This is the function definition called function, and the name of the function is validate form, and then everything is in the body of the form, and then there's even an if and an else statement in the body with their own little curly braces, and there's variables in here. So this is how we're going to finish off this form. Return validate form, if that's the name. If you had changed the name, if you did like a underscore something like that, then you'd have to change that to an underscore, but I'm not, so I'll just undo that and put it back the way it was. So we'll see if this works. We'll just try this one out first before we worry about any of the other ones. So I'm going to save this and make sure I get an X there. That means it's saved. And then I'll go here to my form. And what should happen if I don't put anything in first? It should not submit the form. So let's try this out. Let's just hit submit. And let me refresh it just to make sure. And there's our alert. It says first name must be filled out. Now, if I put in something, a first name, and I hit submit, it's going to go through even without anything else. Well, actually, let's see what happens. If I just I'll put in Terry, because maybe it'll be Terry Tuners. And now I did that, so the form should go through, and I'll hit submit. And it actually went through there, but it didn't put anything in. I got an error here because I don't have enough stuff for, I think, for gender. I think that's an issue. So it's not actually putting anything in there because I don't have values, which I guess is good because it's not giving me false information. So it's actually telling me right here. So it's almost validating a little bit even without that JavaScript stuff. I'll come here and I'll just refresh it just to make sure that it's not getting anything with just a name Terry in there, and it's not. So that's working. At least we saw that it was validating. We're still getting an error here because we're not putting in other information, but we could catch that with validation. So what we'll do is for these other two, I'll do one more, and I could just copy this. And I'll always leave the else, because if it validates this one as true, meaning it's validated, you put in a name, then it'll move on here, and then once it gets to here, that will spring the form to actually run and submit it. So I'm going to copy this and just put another if, and you got to be careful with these. That's why I'm being real careful with the indents. So each if has its own little thing there, and I don't believe that's a dot. Looks like there's a little dot there. I don't think it is. I think that's just saying that I'm clicked on it. Yeah, it's almost saying that I'm clicked on it. I know some Cloud9 used to have a thing where it put an underline under there, but that's putting a little dot. That's just showing the selected curly brace. So I have another one here, and I'll put last name, and I'll change this to last. And so far, if it says if this is blank and if that's blank, return false and don't send the form. So it won't send the form if you put that in. And we're still using alerts here, which is okay. So I'll go back here. I'm just going to go back and I'll refresh it. And if I do submit, it'll say first name must be filled out. So I'll put in Terry, and then I'll hit submit, and I'll say, oh, last name must be filled out, and I'll put Tuna. And then if I hit submit, it'll actually go, or it'll give me this error, Terry Tuna, and I don't think it's putting anything in. I'll see if it is. I'll just go here and refresh. And it's not putting any Terry Tuna in there. It's not letting blank fields go in there. So that's actually good that that's happening. It's not showing us the value of our validation form as much. This last one here, well, we could do species too. Species will be exactly the same way. We're going to copy this second if statement and put it here before the else statement. And then this one is going to be species must be filled out. And then I'm going to make sure this says species. And so if that's right, if that's right, if that's right, it's going to move on. So let me save this, and I'll just go back and refresh. And now if I hit submit, it's saying this must be filled out. So I'll put in Terry. Now if I submit, it says last name must be filled out. So I'll put in, and then I'll hit submit, and then it says species. And I'll put tuna fish. And then if I hit submit, it goes, and I'm still getting an error because I'm not putting anything in gender. And I'm just going to go here again and make sure, just to validate that it's not putting anything in here. I'll just ignore that. And I'm not getting any Terry Tuna in here. So it's not adding without the gender thing. And like I said, that's a little bit different than I did in the past. So that's why this is a little bit different. Okay, so these things work. So we're almost done here because we have the only thing we had to do in our form is do this on submit, return validate form in quotes, make sure it's in quotes, just like that. And then in our form, our JavaScript, here's our whole script. If I could fit this in the window here, our whole script is this function. We have 3 variables, we have 3 if statements, and then we have an else. Now the one thing we didn't do yet is going to be the one that has the gender. The last one is going to be gender, and we can have that variable gender, and it says get element by gender because that's the ID. Well, let's check the ID. Actually, we have 3 IDs. So what we're going to have to do here, since we don't have just one ID gender, we have names of gender, and we can't actually get HTML elements from name. We can get it from the tag name, but they're all the same too. So we have 3 separate IDs, male, female, and other, and we're going to use that for now. So what we'll do is we'll make 3 variables for that. So we'll call this one gender M, and we have to use its ID. So its ID, as I gave it, was male with lowercase. So I'll make sure that's male. And then, and I looked this up too, there was a input radio checked property. This is under W3 schools. I had to search for this, but they show it as .checked. So, and they use true false. So we're going to use that. So we'll make a variable that says that ID is checked. And then we'll just do another if statement to determine if it's true or false. Now we have to make sure they're all false. That means they're all not checked. So that'll be something new as well. So let's go back here. Now we have this one male, and we're going to say .checked. And we're not going to put true or false because we're going to determine that. We're going to have a variable, gender M, that represents the checked value of male. and then we'll just make 2 more, and they'll be the checked value of female and other. And you have to be careful to edit all these. So I'm just calling it gender F and gender O. Make sure you use O, not 0. And then here, this is going to be female. This will be other. And these are the ID names, and just double check that they are the ID names. So now we can basically get these from the document object. We can get the ID of male, female, and other. And don't worry about value yet. The value will be sent when the form gets sent. That's how it will get the M, F, or O when the form gets submitted and the information gets put in the database. But for now, we just want to know if those buttons are checked. And before we get too much further, let's take a break here and we'll continue with part 2. So we're just putting checked state. So we have 3 variables that represent the checked state. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make one more if statement. So I'm going to copy this species one, and I'll put it right after, but I'll put it before the else. Now remember to check everything. I'm going to say if gender, now you might be thinking, well, do I put gender? What do I put here? We have 3 of them. How do I put 3 of them in here? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to put 3 statements with an and in between here. We're going to say gender M, if gender M equals, and we're going to put false. That means if it's not checked. So if this is not checked, so if gender M equals false, and in JavaScript we use double ampersands to be end, and we're going to put this all in the parentheses. I tried it another time without parentheses or in 3 separate parentheses, and it didn't work. They have to be in the same parentheses. So if you look at the little samples, there's some samples here that had it all together. So they put the ampersands in here inside one parenthesis. So I had to double check that out because I just had to refresh myself with JavaScript. So everything's inside here. And so what you could do now is just copy these, and I'm going to paste that there. And this one's going to be gender F equals false. And I'm going to put another ampersand. And then the last one is going to be gender O. So, and I just put a 0, so make sure you put an O. So these are showing up in red. All the variables are showing up in red. So gender M equals false, and gender F equals false, and gender O equals false. If these conditions are all met, and when you use and, that means all 3 of them have to be met. You can't use or, because then it wouldn't work. It would just be if one of them is not checked. So if all are not checked, then we're going to return false, and then we'll get some kind of alert here that'll say species must be filled out. And, or not, actually not species, we want to say gender must be selected or checked or something. I'll just put checked since we're kind of using that word there. So I'll put gender must be checked. And I didn't put so we'll leave that like that. I'll capitalize G for gender here, must be checked. So that way these are all false. So if you don't put anything, if nothing is checked for gender, you have to check it. And then that means if it's not that, if they're all true, if these are all true, then it's going to move on to here. So if these are all false, it's going to return false, and it's going to make that alert. So, and that alert's going to say, so that's not going to be the case if you fill it out. If something's checked, then it should work out. And we'll see if it works out. And let's save this and see if this works. Now, I think we're okay here. So remember, we had to make 3 for gender for the 3 IDs, and we had to say they're checked. And then we just made one other statement here, and we put 3 statements inside the if combined with ands to make sure. So let's see if this works. And I did this one time, so that's why you're gonna see an extra thing in there. So I'm gonna make one called, and actually let me show you something. I just tried this last time and I got it to work, and I got it to add I just tried this last time and I got it to add Terry Tuna. I was practicing because I want to make sure it worked before I started recording, and it worked. Now, if you didn't want Terry Tuna in there, like maybe I don't want to add Terry Tuna because I didn't even add Terry Tuna yet, I could go in here and into phpMyAdmin and hit delete. Now, the only problem is it will skip over that number. That was number 13 in there. So if I go to characters again, the next one is going to be 14 because the auto increment already knows that it used a 13. So if I wanted the next auto increment to be 13 and continue where I left off, like I was like, oh, I didn't mean to put that in there, it's going to skip over and go to 14. So what you could do, and I open this up, I have all these tabs open. This is under SQL, and this is just auto increment. And if you just did alter table, if you ran this right in PHP my admin, now you don't have to do this. I'm just showing that if you ever had to delete one and delete one of your numbers, you could do this. But you could go into SQL and just make a quick query that says alter table, and it would be obviously characters, and it would have to be spelled right. There's our characters. There's our characters. And auto increment, and we're not doing 100, we're doing, it'll be whatever the next one is. So it's kind of resetting it. So I'm going to put it to 13 so that the next one we do is going to be 13. And then I'll hit go. And you won't really see anything happen, and you won't see anything in your database. But I'll just go to browse here. And that's 12. So the next one should be 13 from doing that. So I deleted it, and then I did an auto increment, and I restarted the number at 13. So the next one I do, if I go back here, now let's just try if it works. First of all, if I hit submit, I should get a message about first name. And there it is. And if I put in a first name, I'll do Fanny Flipper. Now, if I go here, it says last name must be pulled out. I'll put Flipper. And then I'll hit this, and then it says gender. And I must have screwed something up because I don't have species here. Let me just check what I did here. Oh, I got rid of value here for some reason. Let me do that. For some reason I was messing around with stuff. I got rid of value. I'm glad I checked that before I did it. So that's why I didn't do it out of order. I just, for some reason, I took out value when I was doing something. So let me save that. And let me go back here. And let me just go back and refresh this page. And I'll try it again. Now, we already know the first two work. So I'll say Fanny Flipper. Now, I should get a thing about species. And species must be filled out. So, the dolphin. Now, what should happen now, this is all the work we just did, it should say gender must be checked. So let's see if this works. Gender must be checked. And Fanny Flipper is a female, so we're going to choose female. And we're going to hit submit. And this should add Fanny Flipper to the database. So we'll hit submit. And there's Fanny Flipper, and she's 13 because remember I auto incremented, so there she is. Fanny Flipper is down there. And then I'll go check my database. Now it's not here yet because you have to refresh. And keep hitting ignore. And now we have Fanny Flipper, and she's 13. So that worked. So this all worked. It was a little tricky for using the gender this time, but I'm glad I kind of worked through and did that. I could have skipped over it and said, let's just do a fill in the blank, but we got that to work. And now we can do that. So whatever we do for the next one, we could use the same code. And again, just to review that again, in our HTML form, we put an onSubmit equals quotes return validate form. We put that in there. So we put this is the function name, and also the return statement is all in quotes, and it's in an onSubmit property. And that's all we had to do there. And then what we did for our JavaScript, in between script tags, we did first, we were going to say we had 4 variables, but we ended up having to make 6 variables because we needed 3 for the gender. So we have gender M, gender F, gender O, and they're based on the 3 IDs for gender. And instead of .value, it's .checked. So we're just checking if they're checked. We're not checking any value because nobody's entering a value. That's the problem. Here you can enter a value. Here you can't. You're just checking it. So we're going to do check there. Although I didn't go back. Maybe if you did value, that might work, but I don't think so. So we're going to leave that as checked. And all we had to do is do these if statements that actually go through and make sure that we do this with ampersands in here, double ampersands, so that it checks if all 3 are unchecked. So if all 3 are unchecked, you didn't uncheck anything, it's not going to let the form be submitted until you check one of them. And then, because if you check one of them, then this will turn out, this won't validate, and it'll just move on. Because if this is the case, no, it'll skip over this and go to return true, and it'll fill out the form. And then it'll run that validate form, and it'll submit all our information that we need. Now, one other thing that I just want to point out here that you can do, if you put like a little if you wanted to write something on your form, I'll just do it for one, and I'll just put a little, under the H1, I'll just put a little paragraph here, and I'll say P, and I'll say ID equals alert. I'll just put alert for now. And I have to put that in quotes. I'll put PID equals alert. And it's putting a closing tag here, which is actually what I want. I'll just put them right side by side. So I'm putting an extra little paragraph, and I'm giving it an ID of alert. I could give it a class of alert. And then what I'll do is I'll go in here, and I'll give a alert. Now this means an ID. When you use the pound sign in here, that means that this is a class name. This is a ID name. So I'm going to say alert, and then I'm going to do these things. Now I'm not sure why it's coming up blue, unless it doesn't like that name, unless it's just coloring it blue because it's an ID. But I'm using alert for that. Hopefully that'll work out okay. So PID equals alert, and I'm going to say alert, and all I'm going to do here is say color, and I'll just do red. That should be fine. I should just need color red. So I'm going to put an alert there, and I'll just do this for one just to show it, and then we'll be done with this. And instead of alert, what I could do is I can actually do something called and we're going to use something called inner HTML. It's a way to write something. So what I'll do here is I'll copy this, and I'll put this in here, and I'll just do it for this one, and I'll paste it. Now we don't want first, we actually want what we just called it, alert. We'll call it alert, because that's the ID name. So we call it alert ID name, and we even have an ID, a CSS for it, so it's making it red. I think I have that okay. I don't have any colors anywhere else, but I think I did that right. And we could always make it a class. You could just make it dot alert, and you could say class equals alert. You could have done that too. ID should have worked fine, but I might as well do that just so the colors look nice. So we're making a special class called alert, and that alert is going to be red. So what I'm going to do down here but we're going to use alert since that's because we're actually getting it by ID. So what I'm going to do here, I'm getting it by ID, and I'm using alert. That's why I made it an ID. That's why I made sure I did an ID and not a class. So we're going to get that, and we're going to do something called inner HTML equals, and we're going to give it a value. So we could leave both here, or you can get this out of here, but I'm going to say inner HTML equals, please fill out name. I'll just put that for now. I'll put an exclamation point. So we're giving another kind of instruction here saying, okay, go to document.elementById alert and use the inner HTML property and use this value of please fill out name. And when it does that, it's actually going to make it red. So let's see if this works. Another just little quick thing at the end here and trying that out. And you could do that instead of alerts. I'm doing it in both of them, so it should do both. So I'm going to save this. And I'm going to go back here, and I'm just going to go back, and I'm going to refresh, and it should only work for this one. So if I hit submit, it should do two things. It should show me an alert, and it should show me some red message right above here, like a paragraph. I think it's going to be over here. So let's see what happens. And when I close that, that showed up. So you can probably do one or the other. So it's telling me fill out name. Now, the only problem with doing this, we'd also have to do something to make this go away, which we can do, but that gets into a lot of more JavaScript. But that's something you can this is something you can also do. Instead of having an alert, you could have something else. Instead of having an alert window pop up, you could have something show up on a page. I'm sure there's pros and cons of both ways, but this way we'd have to do more JavaScript to make this go away. So then when you kind of activated another, if you fill it out and you moved on to another window, you could make that go away, but that's a lot more JavaScript just to do that. But that might be better for whatever you're doing. But again, we're just dealing with a form here. So that's not our main focus is databases, but we're trying to deal with forms here a little bit as far as web design kind of stuff. So that would happen there. So then if you did this, even if you filled out like, you know, Steve, whatever we're going to do, Steve Squid or something, and then you went on, it's going to give me a alert about the next one, but it won't make that go away. So that would be something else we'd have to deal with. So again, all I did was just make something that writes out inner HTML, document.get element by ID. That's the way we get something. And we made a new ID called alert, and it's writing out inner HTML and saying, please fill out name. Now we did that with an alert. You could get rid of the alert and do them all like this if you want. But again, it's hard to get them to go away. So you could leave both. If you want to try that out, fine. If not, not a big deal. But again, all I did was add a new empty paragraph. See, there's nothing there. So that's why it gets written to that paragraph. And then also I just made a little ID style for it that makes it red. So that's how you target an ID up here in CSS. You use a pound sign. Use a dot for classes, pound sign for IDs. And that's all we did there. So I think that's good. We're done with this SpongeBob stuff. I know I said last time we'd be done with SpongeBob, but we wanted to validate a form here, and we could certainly use this code for any other things that we work on for our input form that we're going to do for making a contact database. So that's it. That's the end of our form validate called 12b. And all you have to do is just under 12b, just put a message in your comments that you're done with this one, and then I'll come in and I'll just check this under your index file. And then when you're done, you can close this up. You can close up all this stuff. You can you could log out of this, I guess. You could log out of your phpMyAdmin. You could close that up. You could close this file up because you should already have that saved. You obviously close all your tabs here. When you come back to here, close all your files here. If you want to get out of MySQL, down at the bottom, just type in quit and hit enter. And that'll log you out of there, or at least it'll stop your MySQL, so you can close that up. And then finally, you can go here and close your container and then log out.